Hello, it's Miss Werlo, and I'm very happy tonight to be here with author Ish Martinez. Ish is a graduate of Wallkill Senior High School, and he's written this book, Las Villas of Plattekill and Ulster County. We do have copies of the book in each of our libraries, thanks to a generous donation by Mr. Martinez. And he's just going to be here tonight to tell you a little bit about the history that went into writing his book. So welcome, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Ms. Werlo.
And I'm going to just share my screen. We can get started.
Okay. Hola, estudiantes. Mi nombre es Ismael Martínez Jr. Estoy muy feliz de estar aquí hoy para presentarles información sobre algunos lugares de vacaciones increíbles, conocidos como las villas. Entonces, empecemos. So hopefully you Spanish students understood that, but if not, here's the translation. Hello, my name is Ish Martinez. I am very happy to be here today to introduce you to information about some amazing vacation places known as Las Villas. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to hear, I'd like to play about 25 seconds of some Spanish music, Puerto Rican music, from a group known as El Gran Combo. And this is what they sounded like. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that little bit of music. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I was born in the Bronx in New York City. I am of Puerto Rican descent. My family moved to Plattekill when I was just 6 years old. Next. A little bit more about me. I attended Plattekill Elementary School as a kid. Eventually went on to Wallkill High School, where I graduated in 1968. Next. Okay, so while many people were doing a lot of different activities in Wallkill, I kind of concentrated on sports. That seemed to be my thing. Other people were doing plays and debate team and chorus, and I participated in a lot of sports. That's me on the left, 10th grade. JV basketball. On the right is my junior year when I played football. I was a right halfback. And in the middle is my varsity letter, where I earned 9 varsity letters. Next. Okay, so a little bit more about me. The villa that my parents owned provided me with my first job experiences, actually. That's me on the right as a waiter, where I worked in the dining room. I also was a bartender, and during the week I would cut grass, take care of the pool, and do other odd jobs for my mom and dad at the villa. I have a comp sci degree from Quinnipiac University, which is in Hamden, Connecticut. Most of my career was spent as a systems engineer for IBM, and then later on for Verizon Communications. I retired from that job in 2013 after 30 years of service. Next. Okay, so this is the book I wrote. It's my first book, and actually my only book thus far. It's called Las Villas of Plattekill and Ulster County, part of the Arcadia Publishing's local history series. It's called Images of America. And this book was released on July 25th, 2016. Next. My parents, Shorty and Lucy, I'm actually a junior, so my dad's name was Ismael also, but people called him Shorty because of his stature. They grew up in Spanish Harlem, which is in Manhattan, northern part of Manhattan, locally known to them as El Barrio. In 1948, with my grandmother, Irene Martinez, they bought a farm and they called it Sunny Acres. But eventually the farm would be converted into a villa, as there were a number of other villas already in Plattekill. Next. So this is a photo of Sunny Acres, circa 1966. This is the main building at the villa. It had the dining room, the dance hall, and to the far right was a bar. There were other buildings on the property that contained rooms to rent, and other buildings. There was also a swimming pool and a small lake. Next. Okay, so let's get down to what were Las Villas, as they were known. They were collectively known as Las Villas. It was kind of an informal name when people would refer to going to this area of Plattekill and the Catskills, where there are a number of independent resorts. Some were Spanish, some were owned by Puerto Rican families, and they were basically vacation summer resorts that people would go to. So Las Villas, or the different villas, varied in size from small one-room facilities to larger multi-complex resorts that could have 100 rooms or more. What they did is they provided the Spanish and Latino vacationers, mostly from New York City, with a place where they could go and enjoy a rural setting while still having access to many enjoyable activities, including numerous forms of athletics, listening to music, dancing, and the availability of all sorts of delicious Spanish foods. Next. Some more history. The Hudson Valley, as you may already know, and the Catskills have been a vacation mecca since the 1800s. So before the villas were even established, the Catskills were already a tourist destination and very popular. Around 1912 to 1925, in that area, the first Spanish villas started to appear in Plattekill and in the Catskills. They were mostly started by Spanish immigrants that came out of New York City. They were looking to start farms, get out of the city, start farms, which eventually became places that people could rent rooms and turned into villas or villas. I'll usually use that name interchangeably, villa being the Spanish pronunciation and villa being the English pronunciation. Some had been farmers. Some of these owners of these villas had been farmers, restaurant owners, laborers, and cigar makers from Ybor City in Florida. In the 1940s, Puerto Ricans and other Latinos started to arrive in Plattekill and in this area, and they decided that they would start their own villas. Next. The terrain of Galicia, which is the northwestern part of Spain, is very much resembles Plattekill and the Ulster County landscape, as you can see there in the photo. A lot of countryside, wide open spaces, very much like Ulster County and the Catskills. This particular scene is in Galicia. Some of the villa owners actually came from this region of Spain, as well as other regions of Spain. These photos I took when my wife and I were in Spain. We were traveling on a pilgrimage trail called El Camino, or El Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And this is a walkway that you can travel from France all the way to the western part of Spain in Santiago. We decided we would not do the 500-mile trip, which was quite long, but we did walk 100 miles in a week and enjoyed some beautiful scenery there in Spain. Next. So you might ask, what was the draw to Las Villas? Well, in the early days, people wanted to get out of the city. The city was hot, it was crowded, it was noisy, it was gritty, and it was always a desire for many people to just travel north into the countryside. So visiting the country and the mountains was in vogue back in those days. the Spanish would refer to these outings as picnics. They would enjoy fresh air, peaceful, quiet surroundings of the Catskills in Ulster County. The landscape was reminiscent of their own countries where they came from, Spain, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and some other areas that Latinos have come from. And it was an opportunity for them to gather with others of their same or similar cultures. They could enjoy music, they could enjoy the food, the language, and the customs. Next. So for many, many years, for over 80 years, Las Villas in Ulster County was the most popular vacation destination for Latinos in the Northeast. You can see here a couple of shots, one of Acres, one of the Riften Hotel, which was up in Riften, which is outside of Kingston, New York. Next. So many of the tourists that came to Las Villas traveled by what we call chartered buses called giras. And they would come from all areas of the tri-state area. They would come from the 5 boroughs of New York City. They would also come from Connecticut, New Jersey, and even Pennsylvania. And here you have a couple of shots of at different time frames, buses, what they look like. And they would come to Plattekill and the surrounding area by the hundreds. And there were thousands of people going to the different villas as they came to visit. Next. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the music. Now, today's Latin singers might recognize their music, like Ricky Martin, Mark Anthony, Jennifer Lopez, Bruno Mars, Daddy Yankee, Luis Fonsi, Ozuna, Enrique Iglesias, and Pitbull. But the sound that they have, or the type of music that they sing, is really quite different from what you would hear if you went to the villas. Next. So the music at the villas was usually very traditional Spanish and Puerto Rican, Latin style music of the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. It would be sounds like what they call mambo, boleros, merengues, pachanga, boogaloo, Latin jazz, and salsa. By far, the most popular form of entertainment at the villas was the music. People came sometimes just to hear the music. On the left, you see the trio San Juan, and we can give you a 25-second little sound bite of that. Okay, so that was the trio San Juan. They tended, the older people tended to like that music. It was more traditional to Puerto Rico. It went back to the 20s and 30s. So they kind of favored that music. The younger visitors that came to the villas usually liked the more current types of music at that time. On the right, we have Tito Puente, who was probably the most famous band leader or musician of Latin music at that time. And we'll give you a little sound bite of what that sounded like. Okay, so you can see the differences in sounds there. The Tito Puente sound of the band was much larger, a lot of brass, a lot of horns, as well as other percussion instruments. But that'll give you a good sample of what it sounded like at the villas. Next. In fact, some of the most famous Latin bands in the world performed at Las Villas back in those days. On the left, we have El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico. It was a very large band. Tito Rodriguez and the New Swing Sextet. And there were many, many others. They played in the city primarily, but during the summers, many of these bands would find their way up to the villas and perform there for the weekends. Next. So we'd like to talk a little bit about the food that you might find if you went to Las Villas. Again, it was traditional kinds of food, which was called comida criolla. On the top, you see a Spanish paella, maybe a paella valenciana, and a fabada. Those are traditional Spanish meals. On the bottom are more meals that you would find in Puerto Rican restaurants. So you have arroz con gandules, rice and pigeon peas, lechon asado, or roasted pork. In the middle, you have tostones, or fried plantains. And on the right, you have these meat-filled patties called pastelillos, or empanadas. Next. Okay, so there were many, many villas in the Plattekill area, as well as there were additional villas up in the Catskills. But in Plattekill, over time, and these weren't in existence at the same time, but there were quite a few villas that were in operation and that the tourists had opportunities to go to. On some weekends, they would go to more than one villa. Sometimes they would just stay in one villa. Sometimes they would do what was called villa hopping. And during the course of a weekend, they might go to 3 or 4 or 5 of them, just for a little difference. Next. So here's a sample of one of the villas. This is the Villa Madrid, owned by the Tafal family. This was on the corner of Plattekill, Ardonia Road and South Street. Next. This is the Villa Victoria, owned by Joe and Rita Vega. That's the bar that you see there. To the right, you can see their rooms that they would rent. This is circa 1958 or 59. Villa Victoria was on Route 32, just as you entered the town of Plattekill if you were coming from the south. Next. And this is the Casa Perez. Later on, it was bought. It was sold and bought by another family and called Campo Alegre, so it had 2 names. Casa Perez was owned by Daniel and Dalia Perez, and then it was sold, and it was sold to Andres Figueroa. Next. I forgot to mention the Casa Perez was on Unionville Road in Plattekill. This villa, Villa Rodriguez, was also on Unionville Road in Plattekill. It was owned by Manuel Rodriguez, later on sold to the Guadaramas families, and it was called Villa Guadaramas, owned by Pedro and Gonzala Guadaramas. Next. And here we have the Villa Garcia. The Villa Garcia was also on Plattekill, Ardonia Road, and it was owned by Flora and Justiano Garcia. And this was, like I mentioned, on the Plattekill, Ardonia Road. Next. Okay, so the Villa Nueva was on Plattekill, Ardonia Road. Villa Nueva was owned by a woman called Amor Garcia, or Chata, as they knew, as her name was, as they called her. Villa Nueva was probably the largest of the villas in the Plattekill area. Next. Okay, so that was a good sampling of some of the villas and what they look like. So you might ask, how long were the villas around? The era of the villas existed from at least the 1920s into the 1990s. And what I call the golden era of the villas, when the most people were vacationing there and visiting, was from 1950 to 1980. And at its peak, there were probably about 40 to 50 active villas between the town of Plattekill, town of Newburgh, and the Catskills as well. And here we have some signs that you would see as you entered Plattekill, advertising the different villas that you might be interested in visiting. Next. Okay, so the villas, sadly enough, started to fade quickly after 1985. They were losing their popularity, especially the younger generations were finding other destinations to go to. Flyaway vacations were becoming more and more common. People were traveling to Florida and California, Atlantic City, and all these other different places. So they kind of lost their popularity, much like the Jewish resorts in the Monticello area, the way they faded away. Today, if you were to visit these different villas or where they resided, you would find some of the buildings had been converted to maybe apartment buildings, or for some other usage, you might find dilapidated or burned down buildings. And you might even find overgrown or just empty parcels of land where the villas once were, but no longer are, and being taken over by trees and shrubbery. Next. Ok, ese es el final de mi presentación. Muchas gracias por su interés y atención y buena suerte a todos ustedes y sigue tu viaje para aprender español y la historia de las villas. Adiós. That's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your interest and attention, and good luck to all of you as you continue on your journey to learn Spanish and the history of Las Villas. Have a great day. Thank you.